Okay, great, great. Assalamu alaikum. I'm very happy to be joined by Imam Shuaib because I've been meaning to really talk about how Islam is such an influence on my medical presentation. I'm a physician. So Imam Shuaib is known to our community for many, many years. And what I find inspiring about him is that there is not a single khutbah that is not inspiring and upbeat, even in difficult subject areas. So, Brother Shuaib, thank you for joining me on this podcast relating to health as well as faith.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Happy to be here. We begin, alhamdulillah, in the name of Allah, by praising Him, by glorifying Him. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make this a beneficial conversation, inshallah, and hopefully we learn from each other.
Inshallah. Ameen. Very good. Very good. The title is about health span, living and living well. And there's a lot of research on particularly fasting and just incredible amounts of research. So, I wanted to do exchange what the teaching is and, what science is confirming, really.
Okay. Alhamdulillah. I mean, there's a hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, Sumu tasihhu, fast and get well. So,
alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. It's not new. Even many of the Greek theologians brought it up. But again, where did they learn it from, right? Where were they inspired? We will never know, I suspect. But fasting is amazing because most diseases are because of signals that are brought about by what we put into our body. So the simple thing, just to get things moving, is when we put in refined foods, it turns on signals like inflammation. And that prematurely ages us, really.
Yeah. And it's amazing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it mandatory for us as part of our worship. It just goes to show that He wants us to live a healthy life. And it's all about this rahmah. And the Quranic ayah that talks about fasting, He says, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ, that fasting has been prescribed for you, like it was prescribed for those before you. So it's almost like a prescription given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Literally.
Yes. Alhamdulillah.
It's interesting you say that because I actually repeat that quote. Yeah. And I don't know if it's in the other theological books, in all religion in some way or form. But I mentioned that, and frankly, now it's fashionable to say it, because when I say fashionable, I don't mean in a bad way. I mean fashionable that people are educated about it. They see the value of it. A lot of people discuss it and find different ways to. Is it a dry fast and a wet fast? So obviously, from our Ramadan point of view, it's a dry fast.
Yes.
And a wet fast just means you're not eating, but you can drinking water or tea or coffee. So maybe towards the end of our presentation, we can tell people, even after Ramadan, how we can maintain some degree of religious fasting and maybe non-religious intermittent fasting, we call it. And I'll go into some of the studies that's out there. But
I think we lost the video there.
Yeah, I know. The things keep popping up. Technology, what they call it, glitches. Yeah. So look, I'll tell you the most important thing about fasting is that the opposite of what happens when you put in refined foods like sugars, it spikes insulin. Insulin turns on inflammation. So as you correctly said, that when we don't eat something, not only do we not get the bad thing spiking, we actually activate what we call longevity genes. And those genes are activated by enzymes. Enzymes we call sirtuins, SIRT for short. And this is objective data. Not only can we visualize these enzymes on a research level, we can actually measure people's biological age, which we call epigenetic age. So they're all connected. All the dots are coming together now. What was theoretical even as little as 5 years ago, 10 years ago, is now in mainstream, except that the average doctor is doing disease. They're not really doing, health and prevention.
So basically, from what I understand, is your body is responding to the food according to its own intelligence, its own programming. And if you give it the wrong food, it's going to create a chaos, basically, the inflammation and other things.
Yeah. A simple way that I could also mention it, and stop me if I kind of go at a tangent, because I want to really get your perspective, is that, everything takes energy. So when you're eating, it takes energy. So it makes sense that there should be a time for eating, or we call it feeding, and a time for fasting. So you give that system a break, not just the gut system, but actually a lot of energy is utilized. Now, what people don't understand is that, of course, we need to eat to survive. Yes, but not as much as you think, because it takes energy. And in fact, short term, it creates a toxic burden on the body. The body is more than capable of dealing with it. And in fact, eating raises your metabolism. So there is metabolic byproducts. So those all have to be cleaned up. So if you stop eating, the body can clean it up and take its energy and apply it to the brain and the other parts of the body. But if you never stop eating, then it can never do the other things.
Yeah. It's kind of like cleaning the house when you have kids.
That's what it is. Yeah.
As you keep cleaning, they keep making the mess, and you kind of get stuck in that cycle. SubhanAllah. What you said, what struck me was the Prophet ﷺ, he told us that it's enough for a man to keep his spine straight. To eat one morsel of food is enough for a man to keep his spine straight. But he said, if you must eat more than that, then eat 1/3 food and 1/3 for water, and leave 1/3 for air. And our culture here is, of course, we don't stop until we're full. And I think there's a huge crisis going on now with obesity also. It's and fasting and going back to the tradition definitely is going to bring a lot of people into a state of good health, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, look, the fact is clear. I do what we call intermittent fasting almost daily. That means I can drink coffee, I can have water, I can have some vitamins, but I don't eat lunch, I don't eat breakfast. So I just eat one meal a day. But it's not the same as during Ramadan, because when you're fasting, where you deprive of your body of fluids and everything, you're much more cognizant of your body. You don't have the energy to waste extra words. You're more, like Ramadan. So whether it's Ramadan or not, when you're fasting, you're just more careful about day-to-day things.
SubhanAllah. It's true. Also, I notice when we are fasting during Ramadan, you have a sense of clarity of mind. Whereas on day-to-day, if you don't have lunch or something, there's a fogginess that can settle in the mind, and in kind of sluggishness, So I wonder if that has to do with also the way your brain also metabolizes things.
Yeah, I mean, so as far as the brain, even though it's only, say, 4% of the body weight, it's 20% of the oxygen supply. And so it really is metabolically active no matter what, and it will be preserved. So it'll take its fuel and its blood flow at the expense of other parts of the body, as you know. So I think that, as I said, if you eat constantly, the energy goes to the gut. There's less fuel for the brain. And conversely, like you said, that clarity, one of the reasons is that because you are now not taking away the fuel is not going to the gut. But there are some other key areas. If you're not eating, then the body starts to break down fat.
Yeah.
Because it needs fuel. That fat is then broken down into ketones. Those ketones are fuel, particularly for the brain. So when we get over the age of 30, our brain, which really loves oxygen, sugar, glucose, but only a small amount. Too much is toxic for the brain. But it can sustain the fuel and energy source from ketones in a much more effective manner. And that's what people are missing, especially if they eat late at night and they don't let their brain get exposed to ketones. Because if you had carbohydrates, the brain's going to take the sugar first. And like any organ in the body, it always takes the glucose first. So, that clarity makes sense.
Yeah. SubhanAllah.
Yeah. So the other way to look at it is, not only during Ramadan do we have a time period for eating, which is really what they talk about intermittent fasting, is that you can eat and almost like you don't have to be on a diet. You can eat the same foods you may have eaten for lunch. And you can actually, I wouldn't call it cramming, but the aim would be that you can eat whatever you want without going to refined things, but for a period of time. So like after Maghrib, and then, Isha, we would during Ramadan go straight to pray. But now we're a little lazy. We go a little later maybe, and then we stay up late at night. But I just found that, especially particularly Ramadan, we're supposed to maintain our habits, and I'm sure I'm guilty of that too. But at least I'm cognizant that I should really try to emulate and maintain. It's not just during Ramadan. We're supposed to maintain as long as we can. And 6 months before the next Ramadan, we should get prepared. And I'm guilty of that too. But I think that, what I found is that I wasn't grazing as late in the night.
Yeah.
So one of the things we find is that if you eat, your body raises temperature. It's called thermogenesis. And that's good because that's what raising metabolism is all about. The problem is if you keep eating right up till you go to bed, that rising temperature doesn't allow you to sleep well. Because what they found in studies is that during the night, when people wake up, if they feel rested if the brain temperature goes down by 3 degrees. So if you eat right up to you go to bed and your body temperature is higher, it means that your brain temperature can't come down. So you wake up unrested. During the night, what happens is that not only does the temperature in the brain come down, as the temperature comes down, the brain can detoxify. Yeah. So that's why people wake up with a fog or don't wake up with clarity if they eat too late at night.
Yeah. Another thing that I've been wondering about is the way we fast, it's always during daylight hours. So I wonder if the sunlight has some kind of effect also with the fasting. Whereas, you eat before the rising of the sun and then after the sun sets. So during that time, the sun is out, we're not eating or drinking. So I wonder if there's something there that we haven't, or maybe you know about it.
Well, look, we don't know a lot. We don't know everything about everything. That's the thing. People who believe that, hey, we know everything now, and 50 years ago, 100 years ago, and they know nothing. That sort of arrogance actually puts us in a disservice. So, conventional thought is to say when the daylight hours are there, you should be eating. And when it's dark, you should stop eating. But of course, as you correctly said, let me get rid of this. As you correctly said, for us, we're eating before sunrise. Actually, I choose not to eat. I just drink something.
Yeah.
And I'm going to talk about breaking fast. So even if you're intermittently fasting, it's very important how you break that fast, whether it's Ramadan or not Ramadan. Then again, you're eating when the sun is set. But again, if you eat when the sun sets for a period of time, not 4, 5, 6 hours, what they say with time feeding is that if you sort of fast for 14 or 16 hours, then you have 6 to 8 hours where you can eat. But I wouldn't recommend eating constantly for 6 to 8 hours.
Yeah. The question was, we know like when you're in the sunlight, body produces vitamin D and other things. So if you're fasting during that sunlight hours, would that also have a certain effect, the sunlight itself?
It's very important. Sorry if I cut you short there. Sunlight, vitamin D, by the way, sunlight is not vitamin D. It's cholesterol that's converted to vitamin D, and the sunlight is used in that process. It has to, before you make vitamin D, it has to be metabolized in the liver and the kidney. So if people have fatty liver or unhealthy liver, good luck converting your sunlight into vitamin D. So just a quick go on there. Vitamin D is receptors are all over the body. And that's why when we talk about vitamin D and sunlight, it's being exposed to sunlight, your body will make vitamin D. Those receptors are in the pancreas. So there is an association between vitamin D deficiency and insulin resistance. And insulin resistance can be part of diabetes, and even if it's not diabetes, it creates cardiovascular complications. So there is some benefit, I think, as you said, that during as the sun is up by day, you're not eating, you're doing what we call double therapy, right? One therapy is not eating, the other therapy is sunlight. So let me give you an analogy. So when we exercise, it's a stress. And because of the stress, the body responds. Fasting and the benefits are because of the stress. So we call it intermittent stress. Anytime the body's under stress, it activates longevity genes. So my point is that, so if I'm fasting and then I exercise on top of that, that's double. In fact, just a plug for myself, I'm a medical director of a advanced medical clinic. We call it Next Health.
Yeah.
And so my job is not only to diagnose disease, my job is actually to identify genetics and epigenetics. to be able to tell people's biological age, how fast they're aging, and to try to prevent disease. So one of the easiest way to get disease is to just become biologically old. If you smoke, you don't exercise, you eat the wrong food. If you're biologically old, it doesn't matter what your date of birth is. So what I'm saying here is that that's my job. So I have to be able to practice what I preach. Yeah. So because I'm fasting and I'm exercising, and I'll tell people how they can do this without dying and being depleted. Even though my chronological age is 52, my biological age is 42. It's not by accident. It's because long before research came, I was already kind of, activating things that I knew was the right thing to do. And the wrong thing is putting in refined sugars, which I stopped. Then just eating carbs, and now moving to complex carbs. So I'll talk about these things if we have time.
Sure. You know what I find interesting is you mentioned longevity genes.
Yes.
It reminds me of ayah in the Quran. وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. It's traditionally been interpreted as the human soul has a fitra, or a natural inclination of that gives it the knowledge to know what's good and what's bad. Right. But if you take it to the level of genetics, it's still talking about the nafs, that the genes have that knowledge within itself on how to produce anti-aging or healing or things of that nature. And I wonder if if you could elaborate on that. You'd be interested to know.
Yeah, I mean, so this is subhanAllah, just like our brain has all this knowledge, and there is an ayah to say that you'll only know what I tell you, right? Yeah. People think that their knowledge is not. It's what God sort of opens up. And I think that's what imagination is. Where do people get ideas from? I don't think you can explain that through science. Yeah. Now, the other one is that in your DNA, you have all these messages, but it's amazing that how does it know when to signal what? Yeah. And ironically, if you have abundance, it sends the wrong signals. And when you don't have abundance, I just call it the survival gene. If you're not eating and you're stressed, the body has to activate. So a good analogy is one where if you're on a train, somebody said this, so I won't plagiarize it. Somebody actually said that. I thought it was really good. And supposing it's one of those old coal engines and it's burning firewood and stuff. And imagine that this train that's needing fuel has run out of its supply of fuel. So it's having, and it's a wooden train, right? And so it's having to break up pieces of the train to be able to put fuel in the train to keep going. But as it's doing that, it's cleaning up the bad wood and it's preserving the most important parts of the train, like the engine and the front of it. Yeah. So that's what happens when you're fasting. The body says, oh my God, if I go at this rate, I'm going to die. I have to clean up the old cells, get rid of them. We call that autophagy. Yeah. And senescent cells are old cells. You got to get rid of the old cells so the young ones can survive. And so I'll give you a clinical situation here. So I thought that was really quite good because it helped people understand that, fasting isn't just activating this gene. That gene is doing something. That gene is doing something to clean up the old stuff so that what fuel is left is just for the vital parts of the body. And that's how the body works.
Yeah. And it reminds me of my mom when I was little. She would garden, and she would plant cucumbers, and she would start cutting some of the leaves off. And I would ask her why you're doing that. She said, so more energy can go towards the cucumbers. So
it's funny you say that. Yeah. Yeah. So I use the analogy of roses. Yeah. So I'm a little bit of a gardener, not a very good green thumb at all. I end up killing a lot of things, but one of the things about roses is that if you don't prune them, they become bushy and weak. Mm. So this longevity gene, so I gave you one analogy. That was not mine. That was a train. Hopefully it makes sense. If not, you can ask me. My analogy is the rose. So if you prune it, the next year it becomes very strong. Well, the enzymes I was telling you about longevity, when you fast, you activate those enzymes called sirtuins. Those sirtuins do that kind of thing. It snips off the DNA that's, should we say, old. Yeah. So what you're left with is the rejuvenated DNA, the DNA that's youthful. And aging is like that. It's, of course, it's natural to age. Your DNA cannot stay in the same way as when you were younger. You can accelerate, get older by eating lots of sugar and refined foods, or you can actually, like I told you, I'm biologically younger, not to say I'm going to live forever. I'm just going to stay healthier like a 40-year-old. And every year I'm not going to get 1 year older. I'm actually going to be a little bit less than a year older biologically. And the aim of the strategies of fasting and how it activates the longevity genes like sirtuins, they're like you pruning a rose bush. So what's left becomes stronger moving forward.
And what I also was thinking about, the Prophet ﷺ, he told us half of aging is anxiety. And when you fast with a spiritual purpose, that actually you're hitting it from all different dimensions, you know, not only your physical body, but mentally, spiritually, you're connecting with the divine. You're releasing the anxieties and worries of the world, because part of it is, trusting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Well, that's profound. I didn't want to touch on that subject, but you just brought up the brain. So I don't want to quote you wrong, but you said that during the fasting that one of the things is to lower anxiety.
Yes.
Or if you repeat that, I want you to, it's very powerful, and I'm going to give you the science behind that.
Okay. The Prophet, he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, half of aging is anxiety. So
what is one of the things that causes aging? Inflammation. We now know that the vagus nerve that comes from the brain down the thoracic duct, that means behind the heart, through the diaphragm, into the intestinal system, and that includes the spleen.
Yeah.
That's part of the immune system. So what they were able to prove is that when people with inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's is one of those names, ulcerative colitis, they found that the signal that comes from that vagus nerve can either create inflammation or turn it off. So in other words, when you have anxiety, you are stimulating the sympathetic pathway. That's pro-inflammatory. The parasympathetic, which is the vagus nerve, slows down the heart rate, makes you calmer, the opposite. And that has been shown to reduce inflammation. So, the more studies are coming out about the brain, you know how they say the brain, the stomach is your second brain? That's true. And what we used to say was that 80% of your immune system is in the gut. And actually, based on my experience, I think 50% is in the brain and 50% in the gut, because you actually have a two-way highway. The sensory neurons from the stomach relay messages to the brain relays messages to the gut, and it does that through the vagus. Afferent means to receive information, efferent means to send the message down. So it's a two-way highway.
Yeah. And what role does the gut bacteria play in all of this when you're fasting?
Oh, unbelievable. So people might imagine that, if you're not eating, then how are you feeding the bacteria? Because what we know is that if you have diversity of bacteria, you will have better health, less inflammation. So how do you get diversity? Eat a variety of vegetables, because different vegetables have different fibers. The fibers are the fuel for the bacteria. Some people call it prebiotics. Then the bacteria can take these fuel, and they then send things like short-chain fatty acids, which are anti-inflammatory. So you're right, but you'd think, well, if you're not eating, then the bacteria don't get fuel. But just like the body knows what to do if it's being starved or not eating, in fact, the bacteria benefit by their own stress response. They start to flourish. So ironically, particularly if you put bad processed junk food in, it stifles the bacterial flora. And the opposite, if you don't feed, the bacteria have a way to become more stronger. And of course, you must feed the bacteria, but that's when the time for feeding, you must try to, that's why I say breaking the fast. You don't want to eat, the typical refined foods. I mean, once in a while, have something, and later in the meal, you can have it, but break the fast with ideally fat. Fat means tahini. Tahini is sesame seed oil, right? Then make something with it, but go liberal, be heavy on the tahini, be heavy on the olive oil, because the fat actually almost perpetuates fasting. So when you're fasting by day, you can actually maintain the fast, the signals for fasting, by eating olives and coconut and fat. It's sugar that breaks the fast, particularly if you get to over 30 grams. They say 60. That seems like a lot of sugar to me. Or carbohydrates, because carbohydrates become sugar. But fats don't get converted to sugar. It can only get converted to ketones. So eating fat, again, I wouldn't go crazy. You can maintain your fat. So that's one of the techniques to maintain the state of fasting, by consuming some nuts, some seeds, some olives, some coconut of some kind. And so, for people who just can't tolerate the hunger, they can help themselves get used to it by gradually building up. But actually, there's something very powerful about feeling hungry. The feeling of hunger is actually a hormone. It's called a growth hormone releasing hormone. It's a long word, growth hormone releasing hormone. It's a messenger. That messenger is called ghrelin. So when you're hungry, the body releases that messenger called ghrelin. And that ghrelin tells the brain, you're hungry, eat. But if you don't eat, that ghrelin is a growth hormone releasing hormone. It activates your brain, your pituitary, to make growth hormone. So some of the powers of fasting is that you actually activate your growth hormone, and you liberate amino acids from your body. So in fact, you won't waste away. In fact, you won't die. When you break your fast, by eating wholesome foods, you can then capitalize on that release of amino acids in your body to build muscle, and that growth hormone to rebuild your body. That's why fasting is rejuvenating, not just anti-aging. What's anti-aging? It's not really anti-aging like you're going to become 20 years old. It's just making you age in a very healthy way.
Yeah. Also, it's our sunnah. The Prophet ﷺ, his description was, he had broad chest, he had very large shoulders, he had a powerful core. So he was muscularly very fit. And now we see this trend within the younger Muslim community of being fit and getting healthy. So there's a lot of focus going on ketosis, getting into ketosis. What do you say about that?
So I'll keep it simple, then we can elaborate. So ketosis means that you're consuming very few carbs, less than 5 to 10%. Protein, not so much, a little bit more, 20 to 30%, 25 to 30%. Majority should be fat to maintain ketosis. Ketosis means to make ketones. Ketones is what happens if you break down fat. So what I tell people, the ultimate keto diet is fasting. Because if you're not eating any carbs, any protein, any fats, your body has to break down use up its stores first. It takes a day or 2 or 3, depending on how much storage you have. And then your body starts to be in a state of ketosis. It's very hard for the average person to have a keto diet because they're eating too many carbs. Okay, they did a good job of not eating carbs. They're eating too many protein, like they like their chicken, they like their shrimp, they like their whatever, right? And then it's very difficult for the average person to eat a lot of healthy fats. They may end up eating more the animal fats, maybe, because it's very hard to eat a lot of nuts and seeds and avocado and olive oil. It takes a certain amount of discipline. So it's very hard to actually do a truly keto diet. And the way to measure that is if you take a dipstick and you put it in your urine, it'll show ketone bodies. There's also a blood test to look at the ketone level. You can only be in ketosis if your beta hydroxybutyrate that's in the blood test is over 0.5, at least. You really are ketotic if you're like 1.5, 2. That's amazing. Well, the only way to achieve that is really fasting, because the average person with a keto diet, they probably eat a little bit too many carbs than they should, or they eat a little bit too much protein than they should. And it's very hard to eat the amount of fat that we're talking about. Hopefully that's not too complicated.
No, I understand. So
there's another part
the next question would be naturally, how often to fast? And the Prophet ﷺ, somebody came to him, I believe it was Anas radiallahu anhu. He said, Ya Rasulullah, I want to do extra fasting. And the Prophet ﷺ said, then you should fast 3 full moon days. And he said, I can do more than that. He said, then do Mondays and Thursdays. He said, I can do more than that. He said, then do every other day and don't do more than that. So is that in line with the medical field now?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. I don't. You can explain deeper. I think there was another narrative which said that a guy like that, maybe the same guy, that was so fit and so motivated, So he chose to do fasting every other day. When he was young, he was good. But as he got older, he remembered the words of the Prophet. It became hard. And so he understood that maybe I shouldn't have said, I'll do every other day, because now it's getting hard for me.
Yeah.
So is that true that there was a narrative like that?
Yeah, that's true. He was actually narrating it to his great grandchildren. Anas, he lived, I think, 118 years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess that goes to show the longevity. He was fasting every other day. He never let it go.
Yeah.
But he was saying, I wish I had taken the lighter load, because it was their dedication that whenever they would ask something from the Prophet ﷺ, they would hold on to it for the rest of their life. So, but I guess he did live a long time.
Well, that's what I'm trying to say, is that the scripture gives us the answer. It doesn't give, it gives us the direction, but not the specifics.
Yes.
So if I just extrapolate and say, you know what, whatever that person's lifestyle was, they lived 118. Let's see if the science hasn't caught up yet. But we do have a magic number of days where the body really goes into autophagy, where it really cleans up the old cells. Because old cells, they don't disappear. They lay around. And if you imagine, if you have too many old cells laying around, it could stifle the youthful cells from fully functioning. There's clinical situations like that. It's called neurodegenerative disease. ALS is well known, so I'm going to just explain that. So ALS is a rapidly deteriorating neurological disease because the brain controls the function. So when the brain is overwhelmed with these old cells, senescent cells, then the signals to the muscles start to get weak, to the point where they lose function of the different bodily parts. And then they lose control of urination and going to the bathroom, and the muscles get weaker and weaker. They become a wheelchair. In fact, Stephen Hawking was an ALS patient. So, he lost all the functions, including the ability to breathe. So it's a very nasty way to die. So the point is that ALS is one of those neurodegenerative conditions. And the definition is that there's too many old cells crowding out the stem cells, the rejuvenated cells. So it just kept on deteriorating. And so one of the things is when you fast, the mechanism is not only that sirtuin enzyme, it's also activating what we call heat shock proteins.
Yeah.
Heat shock proteins can not only actually does so many amazing things like prevent cancer. So exercise can activate heat shock proteins. Temperature can activate heat shock because it's called heat shock protein. Fasting can activate heat shock protein. So when you fast, you activate heat shock protein. It cleans up those old cells. So fasting is not only turning on autophagy, but it's linked to these enzymes, these proteins called heat shock proteins. And so you can, now people are going to say, well, will fasting get rid of ALS? It'll slow it down. I can't say get rid of it, but activating heat shock proteins, and there are therapies out there that I can go into maybe another time, show people objectivity that there's therapies out there to reverse cancer and ALS, but it's not very common. It's not standard of care. It's not covered by insurance. So, but the fact is that it's there should make it promising that we should continue to research these things. So going back to how many days can you fast nonstop? The intermittent fasting, which means that out of a 30-day month, if you do intermittent fasting for 5 days and eat a normal meal for the rest of the days, normal diet, that's called intermittent fasting. If you do that cycle for 3 cycles in a row, you can actually reduce inflammation, lower blood pressure, lower blood sugar, lose your abdominal circumference girth. It's amazing. No drug can do that. And we call it intermittent fasting. Yeah, sorry.
Just 5 days a month?
Right. And it's not the full fasting, because those days of intermittent fasting was researched by a company called Prolong.
Yeah.
Because the PhD doctor dealing with that knew the power of fasting on longevity, but he knew that people couldn't totally fast. They had to eat something. So what he devised was like a variation of a keto, but much more rigid. And those 5 days that he talked about intermittent fasting allowed for 500 calories, which is not a lot.
Yeah.
Most of those 500 calories were from fat, not carbohydrates and not protein. Remember, I told you that you can maintain a state of fasting if you sort of eat some fats or eat nothing. Yeah. But fats, you can get away with. So those 500 calories, which is not nothing, it's still 500 calories, but because they were primarily fat, it didn't negate the fasting state.
Yeah.
And 5 days in a row with, they made soups, they made some bars, and people were satisfied enough to maintain 5 consecutive days. And that was enough out of a 30-day week, 30-day month. And the rest of the month was like, go back to normal, whatever you do. And 3 consecutive cycles, they were able to prove this and publish this. Now, if you do the complete fast, 24 hours, and you do that for 3 consecutive days, and you can drink water or something like that, you will definitely activate not only longevity genes, but autophagy. Autophagy means that's when you truly, when you say clean up old cells, I just mentioned one example, the brain, but you have old cells for your immune system. So you can clean up your immune system. You can clean up your brain. You can clean up your heart. You can probably reverse heart failure. But what I'm saying is that as a physician, I'm very careful about making claims and statements. Mm-hmm. I'm saying probably. You have to study it to be able to show it. But if common sense precedes us, then I think we need to do studies like that, where 3 consecutive days. So you start autophagy, and then by the 5th day, they say that if you can fast 3 days. So remember, we have like 3, either you choose Monday and Thursday, or you choose 3 days of the middle of the month. And again, we can eat in between. But there must be some virtue of why 3 consecutive days. Because I do the intermittent fasting, I don't actually do a complete fast of just water for 3 consecutive days. It's easier for me to fast by day, have a meal, and then get ready to fast next day and do it every single day. Yeah. One of the reasons why, I was doing like Monday and Thursday during the winter and stuff, because it's very short days. And the problem was that the first day, because my body's used to caffeine, by 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, I'd start to get a headache. Second day, it's gone. Third day, it's gone. So I'm now, the days are long. I'm thinking if I'm going to fast 3 consecutive days, I'd rather do the 3 consecutive days, because the first day I'm going to suffer a little bit because the body doesn't get the caffeine. I'm not hungry, so I got a headache. By the second day, I won't get the headache. By the third day, I won't get the headache. And, I may really push it and not eat anything at all, or very, very little, to activate the autophagy. That's to clean up the old cells.
Yeah. And does that also clean up inside the blood vessels?
That's what we're saying. So, we imagine that cells are what? I don't know, in the bloodstream. Yeah. Everything is made of cells, right? Every organ you see is made of a cell. And each cell has to have metabolism. Each cell has a byproduct. And every cell has to detoxify. Just the fact that the liver is the main detoxifying system, that's because your gut has a lot of toxins in the process of digestion. So the liver has to sit right there to filter everything. But the liver makes certain key in nutrients that every cell can use for detoxification, namely glutathione, right?
Yeah.
And so again, Next Health, what we do is to identify the function of the gut, the function of the liver, the function of the immune system, the function of the brain, the function of the cardiovascular, the function, because you don't have to wait for disease to think that you have a problem. Because just like you said, if you do the right things, your body will be clear and your body will be loose. But when your mind is not clear in the morning, when you're stiff in the morning, when your energy level is up and down or down, that's your body trying to tell you something is wrong, right? And I'm telling you, the fasting, if you don't know what to do, which the supplement to take and what advice, just fast, just like you said, because it's prescribed upon you. And just not for Ramadan, it's a way to heal.
Yes.
And sorry if I speak too fast and loud. But so going back to that, every cell has to get old too. The red blood cells has a 120-day cycle, but every cell, it's just that what happens with particularly immune cells is that they become senescent. So there's one definition of aging, which I think is very, very important. And that is that every time your cells have to duplicate, you're going to get older because you only have a certain number of duplications. And every time you duplicate, the DNA becomes a little bit weaker. And we measure what we call the telomere length. So as your cells divide, that's good. The body will repair the DNA to have perfect cell division, but at a price. The telomere gets shorter. And so when you're born, the telomere is very long. And as you get older, the telomere gets short. That's one of the definitions of aging. But there's a second part. The one is every time you cell divide, you're getting older. No one's going to deny it. You can't stop aging. That's, some people don't like the word longevity. It's like, I'm not saying live forever. I'm not saying live for 1,000 years. I'm just saying, why don't you live to your genetic potential, what Allah will, right? Yes. Not that's what we're saying. Longevity doesn't mean living forever. Longevity means living long. And we can call it health span, living healthy and long, not dying prematurely of a heart attack or a stroke. Yeah. Or not having lots of ailments and joint pains and bloating and acid reflux and thinking that's life. That's not life. That's not what was prescribed on. No disease was prescribed on you, with very few exceptions. And again, Allah knows best. Some people are challenged for a reason. Yeah. The majority are not. Anyway, going back to what we're saying is that that I think I lose my chain of thought. I think of so many different things. They have to get me straight again. Is that the lifespan that we talked about is optimized by just a balance in our lifestyle. So whether it's sleep or when we stop eating and activity means you don't have to run a marathon, but you must be active. Let me give you another science. It's a little bit not directly related. They just came up with the fact that the risk factors for COVID, which we thought were like cancer, chemotherapy, organ transplant, because you're on immunosuppressants. Of course, no one's going to deny that it's high risk for hospitalization and death from COVID. Then we believe that diabetes, heart disease, blood sugar, hypertension. And I was actually giving all this information that, the pre-existing conditions, you really have to get on top of that. Then you don't have to be running scared of COVID. Then the study came out to say that as much as we think that pre-existing conditions like diabetes and heart disease and blood pressure are real risk factors for hospitalization from COVID and dying from COVID, in fact, sedentary lifestyle was even bigger risk for hospitalization and death, irrespective of pre-existing. So if you didn't have any pre-existing condition, you thought you're okay, maybe not, because if you're sedentary, you actually have a bigger risk. Now, you could have diabetes and heart disease and cholesterol and blood pressure, but if you're active, you may actually have less risk than the next person who was not active, who had those same diseases. So that's, mashallah, very, very important to know, just active. And what their definition of active is 150 hours per week, which is like 30 minutes a day. Nobody said this high intensity interval training. Nobody said this sprints. Nobody said anything, just being active, right? Yeah. Just being active. I'm talking too much. My batteries are going, the charge is going down. So maybe, this has been really, really good, but we'll sort of go to some final take-home messages. So the aim is that when you are hungry, embrace the hunger. It's your growth factors and amino acids. Suppress it with water because it stretches your stomach, right? When it stretches your stomach, you at least temporarily feel good. Then have herbal tea, have some soups, have some olives, have some nuts that will sustain you, right? Like with anything, during Ramadan, we don't have any problems, right? Yeah, people whine and whine, but 30 consecutive days, you stop whining and just get on with it. Why? Because your body starts to get used to it. And I think that's one of the keys. The next take-home message would be when they break the fast, don't be in a rush to put sugar in. Like we have this lemonade, but don't put lots of sugar in the lemonade. This negates the lemon juice, really. Don't be eating sweets. Even fruits, I would say wait till the middle of the meal, the end of the meal. Start off with something more protein, like we said, hummus and baba ganoush. And I'm not from the Middle East myself, but why not have a salad with a piece of salmon? Now, okay, you're ethnic, okay, fine. Halim is like made of lentils and peas and beans with some meat base, a chicken base. That's great too, because it's not bread, it's not sugar, it's not juice. So juice is out of the question. One glass of orange juice is 8 oranges. They should think about thinking juice of any kind is healthy. It's not healthy.
Alhamdulillah.
So much to talk about fasting. I think we should do another one on fasting and, bring in other areas. Fasting, how exercise can be incorporated, even though people think, oh my God, how can I exercise? I've had people like this. I've had really strong people who do so well in the gym. They don't come because, I'm weak and tired. It's like, yeah, I mean, sure, you're not performing at 100%, maybe 70%. But remember that you've one stress followed by another stress can actually really, and so I'm going to finish on this note. This is not theoretical because, as I said, at Next Health is an advanced medical practice. Our bread and butter is confirming and convincing and giving people results. Not least, my biological age is not only 10 years younger. But let me tell you, both my parents have diabetes. I don't even have insulin resistance. Both my parents had hypertension. My blood vessels are soft. It's a low blood pressure. So nor do I have blood pressure, nor diabetes. It's very unlikely that I will get heart disease and stroke, but inshallah. But the point is that it's not by accident that my biological age is younger. I have turned off the signals that allow diabetes and hypertension. Those same signals that I turned off, probably allowing my longevity genes to be activated. So one final note is that when you exercise, you release nitric oxide. That is a longevity molecule. That's why I say fasting followed by with a little activity or exercise, you're getting synergy. So people boast about being 3 years biologically young, 4 years biologically young. And these are very health conscious people, but they don't know what we know. We have the month of Ramadan to become strong physically and mentally. So for us, I don't know about, I think that we should understand all Muslims have the power, and Allah's shown us the way. We just have to incorporate a little bit of it during the non-Ramadan days. Hopefully that inspires a few people to, activate the longevity genes.
Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair, doctor.
Yeah, I look forward to the next time. I think for people, let's see, what about, there is a question, what about water fasting? That's what I'm saying. During Ramadan, we call it dry fast, but, you can still be in a state of fasting by having liquids. And so I actually find fasting very easy because I enjoy my coffee. And when I have my coffee, it's black. So I don't even put cream and sugar in. And then when I come home, I like to relax with tea. And with the tea, instead of dairy, because a lot of people have dairy problems, I use either camel milk, which has a lot of healing properties, apparently, or coconut milk. But again, that's full of fat. And then I use a little bit of stevia because the dark chai or the dark tea is very strong. So you can still maintain a state of fasting by being a little bit smart about what you put in there. And then, so I think that people should incorporate, ways that they can sustain themselves in that state by drinking water or soup or some kind of beverage. That was one of the questions that showed up. Yeah. So for people who, if you have questions for next time, who joined us live, we will try to make this regular. I think we're going to do it at the same time, same day and time, every couple of weeks. Can we advise on, did you read that? I think it was heart disease or depression.
Heal depression.
Yeah.
Does fasting help with depression?
I think it does because let me tell you. So how can we kind of give you a direct link? So one of the things, so there's so many ways to hit it, but I'm kind of trying to make it the most effective. One of the common findings with depression and brain scan is low blood flow. It is there with traumatic brain injury. It's there with depression. It's there with stroke. So low blood flow is a common finding in people who are depressed. If you keep demanding the blood in your intestines, there's less blood for the brain. That's one way to look at it. So I would say that fasting can divert the blood to the brain. The fasting can activate ketones, which is the best fuel for the brain. Just those two alone should inspire you to say that depression can be helped by fasting for those two reasons. Better fuel, better blood flow. Sounds like an infomercial, doesn't it? And here I have one if you want to buy one. Just kidding. No, fasting is the solution to everything. Neurological, metabolic, immunological. It doesn't matter. 100%.
And spiritual.
Spiritual. I think what Imam Majid said one time is that, and people, things that people say, it's really for you to internalize. It's not for you to follow somebody. It's like, think about it. So what he said was, if during Ramadan all you feel is hunger and thirst, then you really didn't get the most out of religion, the fasting Ramadan. So I found that, every year I found not only the health benefits, I found more spiritual benefit and I would say spiritual strength. So I think that's that's what Islam is, right? To make improvements all the time. So inshallah, we'll do this every 2 weeks at the same day. What about dates? Yeah, okay, let's answer that one real quick. So when you're breaking your fast, people say, it's prophetic to have dates, maybe prophetic to have honey. Correct me if I'm wrong. But what I tell people very quickly, it's more of a joke, but it's nothing I say is a joke. It's a half serious. Well, in the day of the Prophet, how much diabetes was there? And how much air conditioning? And when did they get the water from the tap? Where did they get the water from? Everything was active. There is no similarity between our lifestyle now. So don't cherry pick the ones you want. Lead the life of the Prophet, then tell me you can have your dates. Because sometimes they only ate dates. They had no other fuel, right?
Sure.
Anyway, sorry to sound aggressive.
One of the signs of the end of time, he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is that people would have hemorrhoids. It would be more common. And in the Mufassirin, they said, it's not because of some kind of health reasons, but because people will be sitting around and not as active as the days of the past.
Man, because that's how he alters the microbe. We know how it got activated. We know one or two things, but we'll probably find the microbes are the ones that send certain signal, which then activate what we know. There's so much we don't know. We think we know it all, we don't. But the microbes is where the money's at. We call the microbiome. And it's so complicated. It's like saying we know everything about the brain. It's so complicated. Even researchers for the brain have given up trying to figure out everything. They're just trying to set up scenarios to understand the macro. The micro, impossible. It's too complicated at this stage. Maybe with supercomputers to help us in the process, we'll get closer. But anyway, I think that the brain is spiritually. I have some thoughts about the brain and thought and imagination that these are not something that you can reproduce. It's Allah's gift.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you very much. So if people want to find us, they can look at the links that are maybe part of where the platform we're on, but we're sure to be here on it looks like Tuesday, right? It's because Monday was a holiday, I think.
Yeah.
But we'll definitely let people know in advance when we're coming back, but it's going to be a couple of weeks from now. And then hopefully maybe we can do it even more frequently. But it's going to be spiritual benefits and health, and the two are together. So that's what we're going to talk about. Closing dua, please, Sheikh.
الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق ناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله حق قدره ومقداره العظيم صلاة تفتح لنا بها أبواب الرضا والتيسير وتغلق بها عنا أبواب الشر والتأثير وتكون لنا بها وليا ونسيرا أنت ولينا ومولانا فنعم المولى ونعم النصير. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us His unending and boundless mercy and to grant us the best of life in dunya and the akhirah. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to provide healing for all of those who are going through illnesses and to provide sustenance for all of those who are struggling and to provide peace and security and safety to all those in the lands that are going through hardships. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase our knowledge and grant us beneficial knowledge and allow us to benefit from the knowledge that He's given us. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase us in goodness and protect us and unite us on the Day of Judgment under the shade of His throne. Jazakallah khair. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen.
Ameen. Thank you. Jazakallah khair. Inshallah.